Okay, so today I thought I would do a really short video just explaining some of the tools and equipment that I use when I'm doing my needle felting. I have been asked a few times what exactly it is I use, what needle sizes, etc. So I just thought I would do a little explanation of exactly what it is that I personally use, what I find is easy. So to start off with, I'm going to talk about my little rice bag here that I work with. I do make these myself. Personally, I find it's easier for me to use than using foam. I do sometimes use the little brushes, but they are if I'm doing certain things like ears. Sometimes I use the brush, but more often than not I use my rice bag. And you can make your rice bag however big you wanted to make it. I just use some Hessian fabric. I have some here that I've made. So a nice Hessian fabric. I stitch around the sides. I stitch around it 2 or 3 times just to make sure it's not going to fray back. I use Velcro, and that's what I seal the bag with. So obviously this one is inside out at the moment, but I will turn it in the right way. I will fill it with rice and then seal it up with the Velcro, and that's great because you do tend to like foam, you eventually start wearing holes in it, you start wearing it thin. So therefore I make lots of bags. I've always got a spare bag, and I can use the same rice, just tipping it into the new bag, sealing it up, and away you go. So it's just, this piece is probably, I don't know, if I was to say 30 centimeters by about 20 centimeters. Obviously 2 pieces, stitch them together and then put your Velcro on. Make sure your Velcro goes right up to the edges so you don't get any rice escaping. And yeah, that's what I use my rice bag. That's how I make my rice bags. I also use, one of my main tools I like using is what I affectionately call my pokey. It is a bradawl. And it is very, very useful for example, if you have over felted something, just use this little bean. If I felted it too much, and perhaps when you're felting in eyes, you're making a dip for the eyes, you've got it in the wrong place, you can use your bradawl to pull the wool out. You can actually pull the wool back out and then start again. So that's what I use my bradawl for. It gets used for numerous other things as well, but generally that is what your bradawl, or affectionately known as pokey, can be used for. Very, very handy tool. My needles excuse me, that I use, I have various needles here. I do like the coloured coded ones. This one here, purple code, is actually a 38 gauge twisted needle, and I use those more often than not for just about everything. I do use them very, very lightly if I'm doing fine work, or I just hammer it in if I'm doing some more coarse work. My pink needle here, that's a 36 gauge. 36 and 38 gauge generally I find are good needles for using for your general felting, whatever it is you're doing. The main, you can sculpt with these, and you can knot together. They're very, very good, useful, everyday general needles. This big bad boy here, this is a 32 gauge. It's a lot harsher. That I would use if I was doing something big and I really wanted to knot the fabric and get it started, you know, quickly to begin with. They are no good, in my opinion, for sculpting. They are just good for starting off on big projects and getting the knotting done as quickly as you possibly can. So that one there, that's a 32 gauge. Now, the lower the number, so 32 being a harsh needle, 36 and 38 being your general needles, and then I have a 40 soft needle, which I haven't got with me at the moment. It's a yellow top one, and that is one that I would use for very, very fine work, but it is really, I I wouldn't want to felt anything with it other than doing really, really fine work, because they do take an awful lot of felting, an awful lot of work to felt with them. But they are fine needles. That is what they're for. They're for doing the really, really fine work. So sometimes you might find that when you're doing needle felting, you've got little fluffy bits sticking out. So you would use your 40 gauge soft needle just to very finely knot those little bits of fluffy bits that stick out in. That's generally what they're used for. But for me, like I say, for general use and everyday, more often than not use, I would use a 36 or a 38 gauge. Okay, so that's my needles. I also have in this one, I only have 2 needles, but it will take 3. And again, I've got a 36 gauge in there. That is very, very good for doing fine work, for doing your general sculpting work. But if you were in a bigger surface area, you wanted to do eyes or you wanted to do something like that, I would use this needle, because you've got the 3 points and it just does it a little bit quicker and a little bit stronger. I also have this one. This one I use for doing my ears, because I like to do my flat ears. If I'm not using felt fabric, then I will use this one. Very good for doing flat work. If you wanted to make something, whatever it is, ears, whatever, if you wanted to do something flat, I would find this one. Again, I have got 38 gauge needles in here. It takes 5. I have 1 broken, but that is what I would use. That's what I use to do my ears and things like that, because you can cover a bigger surface area and it does work really, really well. If I take some core wool, just to demonstrate, nice big fluffy bit of core wool, and if I work with this needle, you can see instantly I'm getting a flat surface. Okay, so that is what I would use to do my ears with. And then you've got the little safety thing that you can twist, and that will stop that from moving, which stops you from sticking it in your finger when you don't want to. Right, snippers. Amazing things. Sometimes when you felted something and you have got some little ends on there and you just want to trim them off, you can just literally snip the fluff off. Okay, so that's quite handy. Also, if I'm stitching anything, brilliant for cutting your sewing cotton, if that's what you want to do. Also, if I've done something that's very fluffy, I might want to very carefully trim off, thinning it out like so. You will see in some of my videos that that's how I trim my fluff if I wanted to make it a bit thinner but not cut it straight off across. Pliers. Always have pliers, because particularly if I'm doing anything with a metal armature, pliers are vital tools to use for holding your wire and twisting. You can also get needle holders. This is my needle holder. You put your needle in like so, and then you push it in like that, and that makes it much easier to hold when you're doing your needle felting. I have my 2 sewing needles. I have a normal sewing needle for little tiny hedgehogs and things, and then I have my big sewing needle. So if you've looked at my tutorial showing how I make my hedgehog, you'll see that I actually stitch right the way across the body, right through the body when I'm stitching the actual hedgehog spiky fabric on. And the reason I do that, I was asked why I don't just stitch around the edge. If I get out a hedgehog, a little hedgehog, here we go, a little hedgehog. If I just stitch around the edge here, I'm just going to pull the wool away and it's not going to hold. But if I stitch right the way through from one side to the other, I'm making it so much stronger. Both the hedgehog itself is going to be made stronger, and also the holding the fabric on is going to make that much stronger. So I like to stitch from one side right the way through the hedgehog and out to the other side and stitch my fabric on like that. So when you're doing a bigger animal, obviously the bigger needle is much easier to get in and out of. So that's my sewing needles. That's my needles that I use. My pokey I've talked about, snippers, pliers. I have some fishing wire here, Silk Shock. It is 16mm. It is extremely fine, and this is what I use to make my whiskers on my animals. It's very, very fine. I also sometimes use a paintbrush. I have a big normal wall painting brush with fine hairs in it, and they are actually hairs rather than fake hairs, and I can pull those out, and sometimes I stick those in and use those as whiskers. Again, that will be another tutorial, but mainly for most of the smaller animals I will use this nylon to do the whiskers. And again, sewing it through, putting it through my big needle, going straight through the whiskers, and then just a little blob of glue just so that you can hold the whiskers into place. But you will have seen that in some of my tutorials. What else is there? Oh yes, so my core wool. This is my core wool. I buy it in 50-gram bags from a store in Etsy, which I can't remember at the moment, but I will put that up on the video. That's where I get my core wool from. And it's brilliant stuff, brilliant for doing your bodies and your main general structures. I also use merino. This is merino wool. Beautiful, shiny, long strands of wool. That's my merino. That's wonderful for doing, say for example, a collie dog's head. You've got the fur. This is the fur, and it's absolutely outstanding for doing long furred animals. It's also brilliant for using to do on smaller animals, although if I'm doing my little walnuts, these little creatures here, I find that carded wool, this is carded wool. It's knotted, it's not fine, long strands. It's much easier for putting coats on smaller animals and things like that to use carded wool. But that's not always possible. Sometimes I haven't, like recently I did something, I didn't have black carded wool, so I had to use merino, and then I would take off several strands, crisscross them, and then felt them together to make them more like a carded type of wool. The other thing you can do is you can, if I can find them now, I have these beauties. I have two of these. These are my dog's brushes. You can buy dog's brushes. You can also buy needle felting ones, but the ones that I've seen in needle felting are very much the same as these. So I just buy these because they're cheaper. And with this, you put your wool in there. And particularly if you've got two different colours of wool, then you just brush them through and they will blend in together. Again, I have shown that on a tutorial. I will show it again in a tutorial, but that is how I would blend 2 or 3 or 4 different colours of wool together to make something specific. Okay, so that's my dog's brushes. I also use garden wire. I've just got this all tied up in knots. Different types of garden wire. The gauges I will put up on the screen for you to see, but I have a finer one obviously for my smaller animals, and I have the thicker one for bigger animals. So I've done, for example, a big dragon, and I needed something with a bit of strength to it, so I've used the thicker garden wire. This is more of a crafting wire, and like I say, I will put the gauges up of the wire that I use so that you can see that as well. But that's my wire that I use. That's what I use to make my armatures with. Then when I am winding my feet for robins, things like that, I have a robin on the go here, so his little feet. I just use general knitting, double knitting wool, which I would wind around my wire to make my armatures with. I've done tutorials showing how I've done that with both the robin and with the mouse. So just general double knit wool that I use for that. Very brightly coloured, but sometimes for my ears I will use already made felt sheets that you can buy. Sometimes I use this tool and I actually do the ears myself, but other times, particularly for small intricate ones, I will use already made felt sheets. It just makes it that little bit simpler. You can add your core wool to it, or your merino, or whatever wool you want to add to it to add extra colour. But that I find is a good structure to make ears with. Even when I've done my 3D dog portrait heads, I've started off with a sheet of this, with a piece of this cut in an ear shape, and then I have put my wool, my merino wool, over it to blend in the colours that need to be blended in. But it just gives you a good structure. Okay, so that is basically what I use to do my needle felting, and I will get another tutorial up and running. I'm going to do a tutorial on a sleepy bunny, or rather a sleepy mouse. I've done a sleepy bunny. So I have one of these wonderful things which I need to make quite a few of for the Christmas craft fairs I've got coming up, and I like to make little sleepy animals to go inside them. So the next tutorial that I will be doing is just simply making a little sleepy mouse to go inside my bauble.